Alright, what's up everybody? This is JY. We're going to be doing week 3 of the Protoss angle on this Forge Fast Expand 1-1 video. Hopefully you guys have been keeping up with it as always. And I'm just going to dive right into it instead of going into all of the background, because hopefully you're also watching the Zerg one where I've kind of just talked about some updates. But yeah, we're going to go over the next 3 minutes. Which is basically 9:30 to around 12:30, and this is going to conclude the build for this one, and then afterwards we'll start going into a little bit more variations and fun builds and more response type things, okay? So just to recap, basically what happened is we're going for this 1-1 opener. I've got 45 probes, which is beautiful. 41's that minimum number for 2 base saturation, right? But 45 is a nice hedge. I like to have 45. That's just kind of the way that I play. But if you want to be extra aggressive, feel free to cut probes at around 630 with at least 41 probes, okay? Or 42 because you need to trap a probe to control your Corsairs. But if we recap what happened, we've got our 4 High Templar, right? We've got Storm. We've got 3 cannons in case the Zerg kind of maybe wants to come bust me. We're scouting around the map with our Zealots and our Corsairs. We've got our 7th and 8th gateway that's warping. I've got a robotics facility ready, so I'm in a nice spot. Okay, so hopefully, yeah, as you're trying your builds, I think this build is a lot harder for Protoss to execute than it is on the Zerg side, so you know, you're given a little bit of slack if you've been falling behind on your metrics, okay? Because this is one of the hardest builds to execute. But it's a good build because it teaches you how to learn how to scout and how to build good habits on having anti-air and being active around the map, okay? So again, you don't have to be crazy, like constantly moving. Just check periodically, just once every 30 seconds. Send the Corsairs in, send it out. Maybe even keep your Zealots and then try to snipe like their 4th base. Just 2 clicks. Right? And you don't need to be really crazy. And if you're in the live cohort that I was, you know, playing against students, I was playing with one hand and just checking and walking away and coming back, right, with like 100 APM. Okay, so if I can do that with one hand with 100 APM, you could do it too. Okay, you don't have to be fancy. Again, if you're playing at a lower level, your opponent's also a lower level, so don't worry too much about it. But at this phase of the game, okay, so what do we do? So it's super important to be scouting at all times, but again, if you can't scout at all times, don't worry too much about it. I would kind of just recommend that you stay at home with all these units instead of going for like a Templar push. So Zen actually asked a really good question, like, hey, how do I know when to go for a Zealot High Templar push or not, right? The answer is, it is based off your scouting information. So if you're having a hard time scouting what's going on and interpreting while keeping up with your build, I'd say prioritize the build first. And then as it starts to become second nature, focus more on your scouting information. But basically, remember in the Zerg video, right about now, the Zerg, let's just pop quiz, right? What's the Zergs doing at 9:30? They are, I'm just going to pause for a little bit, just so hopefully that you can kind of piece together things, right? They're making their lurker upgrades. They're making Hydras as they're making their lurker upgrades. They're thinking about, or they have a 4th base, right? And these are the things you want to know in your head, even if you don't play Zerg. What do you think is an appropriate way to punish a greedy Zerg? Well, I have one idea. What if the Zerg goes from 30 to 55 drones without making any Hydras? And they don't have lurkers, okay? Or what if you notice that their lurker aspect is really late, right? And they just move on to droning without lurkers. Those are great opportunities for you to punish them with Zealots and High Templars and Corsairs, because if they don't have lurkers, it's going to come down to micro, right? Like, you might not always win, but if you cast a couple of good storms, it's really hard for Zerg. And even if you trade and then you take a 3rd behind that, it's usually good for Protoss. If you can get a decent trade, Zerg gets really nervous, and your 8 gateways are just going to barrel through the Zerg because you're not even giving them an opportunity to drone properly, okay? Let's move on with the build. So in this case, I don't think I actually move out. So I geared it more towards like, you know, the noob friendly. I guess maybe I do move out. Maybe I move out to kind of like camp the ramp, I guess. I would actually be careful about putting your High Templars out like this. This is probably a wrong move. I would only move out like this if you're confident in your scouting information that there exists no straggling Hydras, like Gorilla Hydras out there that's ready to snipe you. But if you don't know and you're also against a good Zerg, you should probably keep these High Templars at home. Like, sit them right there and just wait. And then you can just still try to get value with Zealots and Corsairs out. Because if there are Gorilla units out there, then you want to really punish them. You just chase after them and attack them. But I'm moving them out because I'm assuming that they're not out there. And notice once I have, let's see how many Zealots that I have. 12 plus, you know, 5, 6. So what is it, 18 Zealots? That's a lot of Zealots. And you usually might lose like at least 4 to 6 early on. Then you want to start pumping Dragoons with like the range upgrades and Observatory. I like to get +1. Oh, I guess usually I get +1 armor, but in this game I just get +1 weapons. That's okay. +2 weapons is okay against the Hive style, but against the meta lately, you should get the armor because it's a little bit more Hydra heavy, and the armor acts to offset the Hydra upgrades. Okay. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm just balling up and getting my observers, and once that observer comes out, that gives me a lot more equity in my push. So observer plus Goon really completes that Protoss ball, and I personally like to attempt to take my 3rd base at around this time as I move out. Okay, that's a key point. And usually once my Goon upgrades finish with my observers, right at around 10:30, right, so you see how it's just both coming out. The faster you get your observers and the faster that you control the map, the faster you can go and push and punish the Zerg. Because remember in the Zerg video, Zerg wants to drone to 55 right now. But if you're constantly out on the map, then they might get nervous. They might be, holy crap, they're coming out soon. And if your build is super crisp and you're able to get that observer plus Goons out fast, you might even catch them with their pants down, right? Like they might be droning. And I like to push out sooner, but the only caveat is make sure your High Templar don't get sniped, okay? So make sure you're okay on that. And notice that once you take that 3rd base, I love to take the 3rd base before I enter battle so that it starts to warp as I battle. And as you take this 3rd base, as you move out right around 10 to 41, notice one thing that changed on this picture. My pro count went up to 47. Why is that? Because you want to resume probe production to roughly around 55, because you're kind of matching the probes production against the Zergs to getting from 45 to 55 once your 3rd base is up, and then you also want to push to around 60, 65 once your 4th base is up, okay? So that's kind of like that magic number. I think 55 to 60 is probably a really good number, but 65 is also pretty solid. And once your 3rd base is about to be finished and you're starting to mine a little bit more money with some extra probes, I would actually start to pump up to 10 gateways, because then you can start affording that level of production, right? So it's 8 gateways on 2 bases, 10 gateways on 3 bases. You can even move up to 12 gateways if you have 4 base saturation. That's a little bit later. But notice with the second my observer's out, go. Just go, okay? It's better to apply pressure sooner than later. So I'm just going to attack into my imaginary Zerg opponent here. It's always important here to be very, very tactical, okay? This means don't rush in unless there's a completely clear opening. Always try to have your Dragoons up front, okay? You usually want to have like 16 or so, but at the same time, it's okay if you can't quite get it, because if you're trying to hit a super fast timing, like this is 11 minutes, and that's really fast, you want to set up your Dragoons right in front, make a line of them, put your Zealots behind, and start stacking your High Templar in a row so that they can actually attack anything, okay? So obviously I'm not playing against an opponent, so like I'm not actually doing it. But really, let's say the lurker fields are like right here. You want to set up your goons. Your zealots are behind, observers forward and spread, and then you just kind of storm as they try to come to you, right? If they're like a dodgy type Zerg, then you don't want to like fall for just like not storming. But I would try to like send the goons first and attack naked lurkers. But if they're not naked and they have Hydra support, go kill the Hydras. And you're really just trying to barrel down that first line of defense before you just go in, okay? But really the important part here is usually around 11:30, I would encourage you to really shoot for that 150 supply, get a couple of cannons. Notice how I'm making probes again. So if you're at 44 or 45, you're trying to probe to 10 more, then you just want to make 5 more probes at each nexus. Notice that I have super saturation now, and I'm ready to transfer once this is done, right? So this is kind of like important to see. Notice that like my probes are super saturated here, right? Like if you watch them slowly, it's just like super duper saturated. So it's important to kind of like memorize what this looks like. Even from a Zerg player, memorize that this is super saturation. Why? Because this kind of tells you that they're ready to kind of extend it to that next game and transfer their probes, and they have a healthy economy moving forward. But if their probe line looks really light, especially at this phase in the game, they're very much all in, or they have a really hard time recovering from this. Because if they don't have that 55, then they're gonna have a really hard time getting forward with anything. Notice how I'm putting out my 10 gateways here. So maybe for this exercise, I would try to do a couple of things, right? Try to get 16 to 18 Dragoons right at around 12 minutes. Try to have at least 150 supply, and try to get 50 to 55 probes as you move out with the third base. And if you can, try to start your fourth base or even like a pylon at the fourth base, just to kind of get it set up, okay? It's a lot to do. I know it's a lot to do. And if you can't handle it, focus on the push first, okay? The third base next, okay? The probes next, and then the 10 gateways next, and then the fourth base, okay? These are kind of just the way of prioritization. And just as a little tidbit, as you're moving forward in the build and as you're attacking, one big tip that helps me is right before I attack, I like making 4 more High Templars, or as many High Templars as I can, back at home to replenish my High Templar supply. Okay, so once you lose all of your High Templars, you need to replenish them so that you have that ammunition loaded as you move into the late game. Because if you botch this attack and they come counterattack and kill you, and you don't have any storm, then you're in a lot of trouble. So, alright, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully we're kind of clear on how to move forward. I think that as a Protoss player, this build is tough, but as long as you're just executing, as long as you just get 44 probes, 2 bases, 8 gateways, and your 8 gateways are on time, okay? Don't get late 8 gateways. You can have reasonably strong punching power to beat lots of Zergs just by making units from 8 gateways, okay? So just know the power of 44 probes plus 8 gateways is very, very, very like potent, right? Like even if you're behind, just try to go for it, try to get some storms, and you can win a lot of games. You can win a lot of games at any level. Pro level, you know, foreigner level, lower level. And this is where the Zerg starts to get really upset at you because you're like, oh, that's not fair. You just 1A, 2A, 3A into me. But all right, that's it for today. Thank you so much, and see you next week.